Hi guys, so I am somebody with a lot of weird opinions when it comes to horror and movies in general, so I thought it would be fun to collate a lot of those weird opinions into the same video. So here it is, my list of 10 horror sequels that I really like, even if the rest of the world doesn't. Now, this is not a ranking as such. I'm just going to go through these 10 films in any old random order, but I don't think we need much more of an introduction than what has already been said. So let's dive in. We'll start with this film. So first up we have Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. Now, I don't like this film per se, so already the thumbnail is lying. I only think this movie is an average horror movie, but compared to how the rest of the world feels about this film, I still think I'm a little bit of an outlier when it comes to Freddy's Dead. But I must offer the disclaimer that I'm really not a Freddy guy. I've only seen all of the films once. That was 3 years ago when I was doing a review series for this channel. I've got a box set for the first 7 Freddy films, but since I did that review series in 2021, I think, I've not gone back and watched a single Freddy film. I'm just not really into them. For me, there's only 3 good Nightmare on Elm Street films, 1, 3 and 4. That's a decent little trilogy. But after that, it's all dross. It just so happens that for me, Freddy's Dead is top of the dross pile. This one's alright. I like the fact that it does something different with the apocalypse. The first kill is amazing. Like, that really gets to me because I suffer from vertigo, so if I was going to be in a Freddy film, I would be the guy who gets killed first in this film. I just found that a terrifying sequence of events, albeit the slapstick at the end is not wanted. The kill with the ears is alright. I like the new backstory that's thrown into this film. It doesn't offend me in the slightest. But it's a very uneven film, you know. From what I can recall, I would really enjoy one scene, and then the next scene would have some atrocious acting in it, and then I think, oh god, that's bad. And then the next scene I'd be enjoying the thing again, and then a terrible scene would follow that. So it's a really inconsistent mess of a film, and yet I still enjoyed it way more than 5, way more than some of the other films before and after this one. So yeah, I think Freddy's Dead is alright, so there you go. I don't think Alien 3 gets quite the same hate that it did 10, 20 years ago. And I think the biggest reason for that is that there are simply other Alien films for people to pick on now. So there's loads of people who really don't like the Ridley Scott prequels. You've got your band of people who don't like the Alien versus Predator films. And I think there are literally people out there who used to hate on Alien 3 who these days would probably say, well, compared to all the dross that comes out nowadays, I guess Alien 3 isn't that bad, but it's still not great. And the other reason why Alien 3 has made sort of a comeback is because of the assembly cut that came out in the noughties. Like, even I used to think that this film was kind of average back in the 90s, but the assembly cut just changed it. It took it up to another level. The assembly cut of this film is why I now think that Aliens and Alien 3 is, for me, the best trilogy of all time. Hot take, but that's genuinely what I think, because the quality of these 3 films is so good. And Alien 3 is just slightly behind the first 2 for me. The prison setting has got an incredibly good atmosphere. I love the characters in this film. I think it finishes off Ripley's journey perfectly. I think it was actually right to go back to just having one alien in this film, you know, not just try and repeat the action film of the second one. One of the biggest complaints people have about this is that Hicks and Newt die at the beginning, but the more I've thought about that over the years, I think that was the best thing to do. I mean, can you imagine this film with Hicks and Newt? It would have ended up being a little bit too family friendly an affair, you know. Those 3 characters, Ripley, Hicks and Newt, they probably would have had body armor. They would have become the Sid, Gale and Dewey of the Alien franchise, always conveniently surviving, and I just think that would have been a bit naff. It's a tragic thing what happens to those 2 characters at the start of Alien 3, but for Ripley's journey, who is the main character of this whole trilogy, I think it was the right thing. So I personally absolutely love Alien 3. I think it's absolutely incredible. And even though these days its reputation seems to have upgraded itself from terrible to average, I still think average is way down on what its reputation should be. This film has 0% on Rotten Tomatoes and is regarded as an aberration by just about everybody who has ever seen it, except for me. I really like it. So this one features none of the original actors from the first two movies, and it even changes locations from South Carolina, I believe, to Colorado. And that change of setting alone should provide the death knell for the whole thing, because having this fisherman killer being moved from the seaside to one of the more centralized states of America, that should not work at all. But by complete fluke, it does work, because all the locations they've managed to find for this are really strong, especially the ski lift. So they've managed to find this ski lift location to use, and it's incredible. It provides so much atmosphere. You get so many great long shots in this, and I just really liked it. There's also a couple of really likable leading ladies, one of which went on to be a big TV star. The action's not filmed very well throughout this film. That's one thing I did notice. It's not a brilliant film. I mean, even I only gave it maybe 3 out of 5 when I reviewed it, but I still really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the story. It's a very stylish film as well. If you look at the opening at the fairground and the choice of music that's been made, and the way the shots have been done that leads into when the main characters come on screen, I think there's effort that's been put into this film, and people don't generally acknowledge it. I mean, it's the worst of the trilogy, but I would absolutely still put this on. If I'm watching the first two, I'm following it up by watching this one in the same week, definitely. For me, Jaws 3 is the best Jaws film. Yeah, I'm deadly serious. Come and take your best shot in the comments if you want. I can take it, but that's just who I am. I love Jaws 3, and Jaws 1 less so. This film has terrified me since I was a kid. I can remember watching it on ITV, late 80s, early 90s. It always seemed to come on every year or two, and it always had a big effect on me. I mean, those scenes in the underwater tunnels where the water's coming up to the characters' chests, to me that was scary. The giant shark was scary. The scene with the Englishman in the shark's mouth and he's still alive, that was terrifying. I mean, that scene was so scary that they used to take it out of the TV version for many years. I'm sure they did. But there are other scenes as well, nighttime kills like Alderman under the water and the two kids on the dinghy. Lots of very effective footage in this film, but the characters are brilliant as well. The main woman, I can't remember her name, all of the core four, as I would call them in this film, Leah Thompson and Dennis Quaid, just good characters. You get to see them hanging out and stuff, and they're good fun people. Much better than those miserable OAPs, Roy Schneider and his wife from the first two Jaws movies, in my opinion. But I love the setting of the film as well. The big fun theme park, water park, aquatic seal research centre or whatever it is. Just great. And the movie's so colourful and fun. I'm just enjoying it for different reasons all the way through. I think Jaws 3 is just fabulous fun. I don't mind the crap special effects. I grew up in an era full of crap special effects. It doesn't really affect me as much as some of the younger kids these days, I suppose. But there we have it, Jaws 3. I just absolutely dig the life out of it. I do like Jaws 1. I respect it. I like it. I've seen it many times. I've just never loved it. This is a film which has been relentlessly pounded on by online Halloween communities since the internet was invented. I mean, this film has taken some abuse, but I like it. I gave it 3 out of 5 when I reviewed it. I don't mind them doing a film like this at this stage of the franchise, the 8th movie. It's got a little bit of a lighter tone than the previous ones, but I'm fine with that. I mean, if this was the second film and it was coming straight after the original, I probably hate it too. But the fact that it's the 8th one, I don't mind it being what it is. I don't like the opening with Jamie Lee in the asylum, but once you get to the Dangertainment stuff, I just think it's a fun time. Fun characters, fun kills, and the credits come upon me quite quickly in this. I'm just left wanting more because I'm enjoying it. There is this big fear among Halloween fans of doing different stuff. I feel sometimes like Halloween fans just want Halloween 4 over and over again. They don't want Rob Zombie to come along with his different take on the whole thing. They don't want Halloween Ends giving you something new. They just want the same every time. But I just feel like that's a really boring approach to take. I mean, if they did Halloween the musical with the next one after Halloween Ends, I'd be fine with that, because we've had so many normal Halloween slasher films. Why not do something completely crazy? It's not going to change the films we've already had. I'll tell you what I think they should really do with Halloween, and that's a found footage film, because found footage in Haddonfield with Myers floating around, I think that would be really scary. But I also know that they'll probably never do it because they'll just fear a massive backlash, especially after Halloween Ends kind of divided everybody. But going back to Resurrection, I'll defend this film until the end of time. And I know that there is some love out there for it, because I came across a Halloween Resurrection Appreciation Society on Facebook, and it had 17 members. There are 17 people out there like me who like this movie. This is the 6th Paranormal Activity movie. It has a very low Rotten Tomatoes score. It didn't make anywhere near as much as the other films. A lot of people regard it as the one that basically killed the franchise for a while. But I like it. I'm stunned that people don't think this is a good entry in the series. There's so many memorable elements to it. The mist in the air that you can just about make out. I thought that was kind of freaky. And there's a scene where somebody's hiding behind a table unit in the kitchen, and I was really on edge during that scene, wondering how it was going to play out. There's another scene where the characters are watching a videotape, and the videotape starts talking back to them from memory. All good stuff, all good ideas, and a really exciting finale where people start dying off, and you get the big reveal of Toby, and it's like, whoa, game changer. So I just don't get it. I don't get why this one is considered one of the lowest points of the franchise. For me, this is right up there. If I was going to do a ranking of Paranormal Activity purely on memory, and bear in mind I've not seen any of them for a good 3 or 4 years now, I think Next of Kin, when that came out, that's the last time I watched one of these. But just on my memories, I really liked Ghost Dimension. I think most people would agree that the Conjuring universe has been a massive success, but like with any franchise, after a few films, there's always an online backlash. People start criticising any new entry that comes out as being nowhere near as good as the earlier films. It's the same in every franchise. And when it comes to The Conjuring, that process probably started with The Nun. I mean, this film made a lot of money, but in terms of the critical reviews and reviews from fans and just general cinema goers, there was a lot of noise saying that this was really a very bad film. But I think that's not the case at all. I really like this. I was moderate on it the first time I saw it, but I've seen it 3 times now. It just keeps getting better with every viewing. As to why people don't like it, I think people got a few unrealistic expectations as to what this villain, Valak, was going to do. I mean, she'd been in the Conjuring 2 film for like 2 minutes and been brilliant in those 2 minutes, but probably people just expected 90 minutes of that, and it was never going to be that. You're always going to have the build-up and a proper story. It was never just going to be Valak being exactly the same as she was in Conjuring 2. That's one thing. And aside from that, I just don't think people like this style of horror movie in the main. This is a throwback to like Gothic Hammer type era with the monastery in Romania setting. You've got really serious characters like the main, the young nun played by Taysa Farmiga, and the French priest that she's travelling with. These largely humourless characters taking their roles very seriously. They're not a bunch of horny teens who just happen to get lost in the Romanian woods, so it's an acquired taste, this movie, I guess is what I'm building up to. But I like it. I like The Nun 2 as well. This first Nun film, though, I honestly like this more than the original Conjuring, which is the one that gets all the acclaim. It's the film all Conjuring universe films are judged against. I saw this at the cinema and I thought it was horrendous. I walked out of the screening and I was so appalled by what I'd seen. I was like, yep, Scream's done. We've really no need to have any more of these films. And it wasn't until many, many years later that I gave it another try. I don't know exactly how long. It would have been more than 10 years, though, and probably a lot more than that. But when I had the second viewing, it was like, whoa, this is like a totally different film now. And I'm still puzzling out as to why I did a complete 180 on it. I think the biggest reason I did is simply that I guess people change over time. What we enjoy about movies changes as we get older. You know, my tastes now very different at 43 than they probably were back at when I was 19 when this film came out. But I think this is nowhere near being the worst Scream film as many people believe. I certainly think it's better than Scream 2. It's got a more interesting setting, being set in Hollywood. Yes, it has a lighter tone that won't be for everybody, but it's got scenes of really intense horror as well. Like the scenes in Sydney's bedroom, the bedroom set, I think is a really clever part of the movie. I think Roman's a very unique killer, the only solo killer to date in this series. And we've had Scream 6 now, which is easily for me the worst one, so that's another movie that I would put this film ahead of. So, you know, I'm not a super fan of Scream 3 or anything, but if I'm going through these films, I always look forward to Scream 3. I just think it's a fun one, and I'm just astonished that I'm sitting here praising it when I distinctly remember hating it on first viewing. This one is definitely regarded as a piece of crap, I'd say, and yet for me, it's the second best film in the entire franchise. Now, do bear in mind that this is a series full of dross. I mean, once you get past the amazing original movie, there are a lot of dodgy Texas Chainsaw films. I particularly don't like that whole black comedy era. There were 3 films in a row, 2, 3, and 4. I just can't stand any of those. They're just not for me. Some of the later ones that go back to being pure horror, I can watch those, and this is one of them. I saw this one at the cinema, the only Texas Chainsaw film I've ever seen in the cinema. I can't remember the 3D aspects very well. I'm sure they were there, and I'm sure I was wearing the glasses at the time, but I just really enjoyed this. It's got a really likeable main character played by Alexandra Daddario, very good actress, and I love the mansion setting. I wish they'd used that actually in the video game. And there's an amazing chase about halfway through this film, which is probably the best chase since that one in the original, where Gunnar Hansen's chasing Sally through the woods and the house and everything else. The reason why people dislike this film, in my opinion, is probably just because of that one line of dialogue, "Do your thing, cuz," which is pretty horrendous. But honestly, if that line wasn't in the movie, people probably wouldn't even be aware that they don't like this film. It wouldn't have any kind of bad reputation. It would just be one in a whole long line of underwhelming Texas Chainsaw films for most people. But because that one line of dialogue exists, I think some people have latched onto this film as being the worst film just because of that. A bit unfair, if you ask me. The only bad thing about this film is the ending, where the main character doesn't then turn on Leatherface and kill him, because she should do, really, given that he's killed her friends. But I guess they had to leave it open for a sequel that wouldn't ultimately come, because they pivoted and did Leatherface after this one, I believe. But I like Texas Chainsaw 3D, my second favourite Texas Chainsaw film, so there we go. Finally today, and I've deliberately left this one till last because it's my favourite of all these films, we have Jason Takes Manhattan. For me, the best Friday the 13th film. I absolutely love this movie. I saw it for the first time in the early 90s. I think I was 13 at the time. And it honestly scared the bejesus out of me the first time I watched this. And even though it doesn't scare me anymore, when I'm rewatching it, I can still tap into a lot of those feelings that I had the first time I was watching it. So yeah, there is a big nostalgia thing going on for me with this. I honestly could not predict or even guess how I would feel about the film if I was watching it for the first time today. Maybe my opinions would be a bit more diluted. I wouldn't be calling it the best slasher of all time or anything like that. I still don't, but I do think it's one of the best slasher films of the 80s. It is one of my favourite horror films of all time, personally. All the things that people bash this film for, I just don't agree with. I'm not going to go through all that old ground, but I will go through one thing, though, and that's the fact that the film is not set entirely in New York, because that seems to piss people off. But it's the same with the Hicks and Newt thing from Alien 3. If this film was set entirely in New York, it's not going to make the film better. You know, there's a section in this where Jason's chasing the 5 remaining characters through some back alleys. I suspect if this film was entirely in the Big Apple, most of the film would just look exactly like that. Lots of alleys and gloom and doom and drug addicts and things like that. What do people think they would have got if this film had been entirely set in New York? They wouldn't have been using like all the big major landmarks and stuff. It wouldn't have been anything like that. I think it's a happy accident that this film had to spend an hour on a boat. I just think it's part of this film's unique selling point, and I just love it. I honestly, I've seen this film 15, 20 times. I am one of this film's official super fans. I'll defend it to my death. So there we have it. So there we go. 10 films that I personally like, 10 horror sequels, I should say, that I really like. Most other people do not. Do let me know some for you in the comments below. Films in general, if you like, that you are really into that other people don't. And beyond that, I will simply say at this point, goodbye and thanks for joining me. Cheerio.